So later assessments of the quantity of livestock in Kazakhstan put its quantity in June 1931, so 1 year after this, approximately one year after these measures were taken, at 8.8 million. So therefore, the decrease of livestock in Kazakhstan was twice as much as what the requisition plan was foreseen. So more research is needed to explain this discrepancy. One factor was the overestimation of animal weight. This was explicitly said in the documents I found. However, the most likely cause were livestock diseases and undernourishment of the animals flocked in the newly created giant livestock kolkhozy and procurement points. So this was also measured to collect more animals to create huge collective farms that were concentrating a huge amount of animals. So the question about where this livestock ended up comes next. During 1931, the crucial year paving the way towards the famine in Kazakhstan, half of the entire import of meat and livestock for the Russian Republic came from Kazakhstan. Of course, Russian Republic except Kazakhstan. Data for the first quarter of the year, which was the period during the year where livestock procurement quotas were higher, shows that half of the meat imported into Moscow and Leningrad, the highest category in the 4-category list in the Stalinist hierarchy of consumption, came from Kazakhstan. More precisely, 53.9% of the meat imported into Moscow and the Moscow Oblast during February and March 1931, and 43.3% for Leningrad and Leningrad Oblast for the same period. Also, during February and March, Kazakhstan provided almost 60% of meat imported into all other regions of the Russian Federation, Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, except Moscow and Leningrad. On the basis of meat consumption data in Moscow for the period, it is safe to assume that in 1931, so when the massive famine started in Kazakhstan, between one-third and 40% of the meat actually eaten by Muscovites came from Kazakhstan. The export plan from Kazakhstan, outside Kazakhstan but inside the Soviet Union, for the second half of 1931, when famine was already ravaging the Soviet Republic, anticipated that livestock and meat had to be sent to Moscow for 45%, to Leningrad another 45%, the Ural Oblast 7.1%, and the Russian Far East 2%. The rapid decrease of Kazakhstan livestock made it impossible to fulfill the plan. Of the total amount of meat products and livestock imported to Moscow during the fourth quarter in 1931, almost 42% came from Kazakhstan. So on the basis of data from expert in the first half of the year, 31, it is possible to infer that as much as 80% of the amount of livestock procurement plans for Kazakhstan was exported outside the Republic. At the end of the year, in the fourth quarter of 1931, where already livestock was dying in the millions, approximately one-third of the procurement plant was exported. The Kazakhstan Party Committee, led by this man, Insarevich Khashoggi, was well aware of the catastrophic consequences of the forced exports and tried to retain livestock in Kazakhstan as long as possible. For example, by claiming it was needed for plowing. Almaty tried to get this practice approved by Moscow. The Kremlin would not tolerate it. In a letter to Stalin in mid-1931, Mikoyan defined it, quote, a clear sabotage, unquote. So these were the consequences of the decisions. This is a photo from the Oblast Archive in Orenburg about the, it's a family, art family of Kazakh famine refugees in Orenburg in 1934. So after the height of the famine, that were basically relying on assistance from the state. It was a pt.2of2 номер 1. So there are aspects that I don't have time to cover. One is that over the same years of collectivization, the Soviet state was also importing livestock from abroad, mostly from Asia, so from Mongolia, Xinjiang, Persia, and Turkey. However, the quantity of imports never remotely matched the quantity of local livestock and meat disappearing from Kazakhstan and other Soviet regions in the same period. Kazakhstan was also granted a certain amount of grains in order to feed the herdsmen of livestock breeding, kolkhozy and sovkhozy. But the extremely high grain requisition quotas for Kazakhstan in 1931-32 went in the opposite direction, depriving the region of food resources. So grain requisitions went on, of course, also during the famine. I think that the most important point I would like to make is that the fate of the Kazakhs was determined by the fact that the Kremlin saw Kazakhstan, unlike most, if not all, Soviet regions, clearly that the other Soviet regions were clearly divided between grain-producing regions and grain-consuming regions. Kazakhstan was instead seen as an ambiguous dual space, both grain provider and grain consumer. And this dual categorization was a direct consequence of past Tsarist and ongoing agricultural colonization. Since Kazakhstan was expected to increase its grain production thanks to the influx of a new wave of agricultural colonists starting in 1929, when immigration into the region was again made legal. Of course, starting in 1930, the peasants were actually deported into the region, so that the immigration wave was actually the immigration of deported peasants. Immigration into Kazakhstan had been made illegal during the 20s. So this was this period, 1921-22, where actual very aggressive anti-colonial policies were implemented in Turkestan, and especially in the nomadic regions of Turkestan, so southern Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, as Kyrgyzstan was called at the time. At the beginning of the 1930s, Kazakhstan was expected to provide 1/10 of the grain that Ukraine provided to the state. This quantity was, in any case, twice as much as the quantity of grain that was expected from Central Asia, for instance, right? That was clearly defined as a grain-consuming region because the main production of Central Asia was cotton. Kazakhstan was, however, also considered a grain consumer since it was an area of a specialized economic sector, livestock breeding. So the herdsmen had to be fed with grain on paper. Another important issue is centralization. A total centralization campaign of the Kazakhs, as of the other Soviet nomadic populations, was launched at the same time as total collectivization. Starting in the spring of 1929, at the same time as the launching of the first 5-year plan, the necessity of centralizing nomads was directly linked in official documents to the aim of extending the surface till with grain in the Union. In other words, the problem of turning land used by less productive nomads into agricultural land. However, the significance of the centralization plan for the Soviet government went well beyond its economic aims. So it was a way to bring the Kazakhs closer to state institutions on many different levels, and so to implement the cultural revolution in Kazakhstan. We can see here some plans of new villages made of centralized Kazakhs in southern Kazakhstan. These were actually quite tellingly. These photos come from the Oblast archive in Shymkent, so in the south of Kazakhstan, and were drawn in 1934, if I'm not mistaken. So it was quite late. Of course, it's possible to find also this kind of plans for centralized villages for years before 1934, but I was able to find this, that I think is telling that this is made quite late. And so this is the Jubalinsky Rayon, which is this area of Kazakhstan, very in the south, the red area. So between 1930 and 1933, centralization was always a low priority campaign that no administrative body was effectively carrying out. The total centralization campaign, therefore, was not a direct significant factor in causing the famine, unlike you hear or you read very often in general treatments of the famine in the Soviet Union. However, centralization plans and the official discourse claiming that traditional Kazakh way of life had to be dramatically reformed provided a powerful justification for the disruptive livestock and grain procurements that pushed a significant part of the population below the subsistence line. So to conclude, unrealistic assessments of the productive capacity of the region. You have evidence of that in communication between Lingnan, that actually traveled to Kazakhstan in 1931, and Stalin. And Lingnan was writing to Stalin that actually here people that are shocking and other local administrators say that they don't have enough livestock, and so they cannot fulfill the plan. But actually, there is much more livestock that is not accounted for in the assessments, in those plan assessments. So let's have high quota for procurement quotas. So realistic assessment of productive capacity, the lack of understanding of the intertwined nature of the two sectors of the steppes economy after massive agricultural colonization, the expectation of a transformative crisis on the pastoral sector connected with the foreseen sedentarization, callous indifference to mass death, considered the price worth paying for higher political ends. So these factors directly derive from the mind frame of the Stalinist leadership, led to the outbreak and then the devastating magnitude of the famine in Kazakhstan. However, the most direct cause of the Kazakh famine was the massive livestock requisition campaign of 1930-31. The Politburo decided in 1930 that Kazakhstan should be central for meat supply in the Soviet economic system, especially for the supply of the biggest Russian industrial and political centers, primarily Moscow and Leningrad, at the top of the early Stalinist consumption hierarchy that was, in periods of crisis, a hierarchy between social groups whose survival was preserved and social groups which were left to die. So this is a photo also coming from the Moscow archive of, it's kind of a symbolic photo of the use that the state made of yurts. I don't think that these people were Kazakhs, probably these were yurts used for close to a construction site or something like that. But you have a lot of descriptions of villages of Kazakh yurts kind of put into straight lines like this by the state. Thank you.